All right, Northshore Psychology. We are going to go ahead and finish up the school year today as far as all the new information. So everything going forward from here is going to be review. And as you see on the screen today, we're going to go over the social psychology chapter, chapter 17. If you've been following along with the critical writing, it is on Classroom, and you can take a look at those. All the answers are on the Discord channel, so that is available for you there. But we're going to go over the high points right here, the stuff that's likely to be on the test. Now, there's telling us that the test is only going to be units 1 through 7, which correlate in our book to chapters 1 through 13. But we're going to go ahead and go over this stuff anyways because it's spattered throughout the book, and so they may pick up on some of these concepts even if they're not directly from this chapter. So, social psychology. The social psychology is the study of how we think about, influence, and relate to each other. So, social psychology is very close to another school called sociology, which is basically how people interact with each other, or how groups of people interact. So, social thinking. How do we think about each other? Um, then we're going to generalize a lot in here. So this may not be applied to everybody, but we're going to go ahead and generalize some. We've talked about this before in Word of the Day, the attribution theory. All right. So attribution theory is that uh, we're going to either say somebody did something because of the situation that they got put in, or because the person is just that way. So it's either their situation or their disposition. Now, whatever we're talking about us, we're much more likely to blame the situation if something bad occurs, whereas if we're talking about other people, we are more likely to talk about the disposition. So is my friend a jerk because she had a bad day, or because she's a bad person? All right, fundamental attribution error. So the tendency to underestimate the impact of the situation and overestimate the impact of personal disposition. So, uh, how do you view all your teachers' behaviors, right? Do you think that they go home and give their significant others assignments and things like that? Um, how much of what they do is because of their profession and what they've been told to do, and how much of it is actually part of their personality, right? We're going to err on the side of saying it's their personality that uh, is the reason people do stuff, but it's actually usually the situation. All right, so attribution at work, negative behavior, somebody cuts you off on the road, right? Situational attribution might be maybe the driver's sick, so we're going to go ahead and slow down. We're going to give them a lane. We're going to say, okay, um, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Distribution or dispositional attribution would say, that guy's a crazy driver. He's trying to hurt me. And then you're going to have an unfavorable reaction. You might actually wind up endangering the both of you as you try and get back at them, right? So the effects of attribution. We have social effects, political effects, and workplace effects, right? Um, we talked about in one of the more recent Order of the Days the just world phenomena. And that says that we believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So if somebody is in a negative situation, like the one on the screen here, um, then uh, that error, the effects of the attribution error, are that she must have done something, right? She made an error in some way. This comes into blaming the victim, political effects, right? Uh, well, Democrats are always this way, and Republicans are always that way. Attribution, right? All right. So attribution and attitudes. So attitudes is a belief or feeling that predisposes you to react to something in a particular way. So an attitude is before something even happens, you're already you've already decided what your response is going to be before that happens. So it's a predisposition, and your attitudes can say a lot about who you are as a person. So, do our attitudes guide our actions? Our actions more often guide our attitudes than our attitudes guide our action. The situation where attitudes can guide our actions is if the external pressure is minimal, it doesn't cost a lot socially to help somebody out. We're aware of our attitudes, and the attitude has to be obviously relevant to the behavior. So we've got internal attitudes, external influences, which make up behavior. Now, internal attitudes are actually the smaller of this portion. The external influences are usually the larger of the portion. So more often, our actions affect our attitudes. So we've talked about this a while ago in Word of the Day. Foot in the door phenomena, the tendency for people to first agree to a small request, later comply with a larger request. This is also called a compliance ladder. If I give out an answer on a quiz, almost invariably what's going to happen next is you're going to ask me for the next answer, right? So this is the foot in the door phenomena. You get them to agree to something small, and then you step it up. The flip side of this is the door in the face phenomena, right? The tendency of people to say no to a huge request will usually comply with a smaller one. So you can use one or the other. You don't want to use both of these at the same time, obviously. It's the tendency for people who say no to a huge request to comply with a smaller one. So if I ask my wife for tickets to the Final Four, probably not, right? But then I say, okay, well, can I have some friends over and watch it on TV, right? And, there might be a okay with that. All right. So role playing affecting attitudes. Zimbardo's prison study. This comes up in chapter 1 as well, so it could still be on the test. So what they did in this study, and there's been a lot of criticism of the study in general, and we're not going to get into that too much, but what they did is they broke a group of people up into prisoners and guards, random selection. They took the prisoners down to the police station, booked them just like they were going into a real jail, but then they took them into a fake jail at the psychology lab at Stanford. They had guards that were told that they needed to keep order and needed to keep the prisoners in line. So what wound up happening is that some of the guards took a very gruff stance with some of the prisoners. Some of the prisoners pushed back a little bit. The guards then cracked down even more to the point where they were actually very adversarial. They were fighting each other a lot. And the guards then started to Without physically abusing them, they started to abuse the prisoners, at which point in time Zimbardo's wife threatened to leave him if he kept going with the experiment, and he shut down the experiment. So what happens when we become aware that our attitudes don't match our actions? That is called a cognitive dissonance. All right, so we don't like when our attitudes don't match our actions. Some people would say that's being hypocritical, right? And we wind up with a cognitive dissonance. I want to protect the environment, but I still drive 22 miles to work, or used to back before, this. Um, when they clash, uh, we usually change our attitudes to create the balance. So every now and again, we'll change our behaviors, but more often than not, we'll change our attitudes. Well, the students really need me, and so it's okay for me to drive that far, but other people should. All right. So, cognitive dissonance theory. Fiona says that her college tuition is too high. She goes through the budget. They say, well, then cut money out of the budget and we'll lower your tuition. And she says, well, we need the money to do all the things that we say we're going to do for the students. So the attitude and the behavior are inconsistent. So what's going to give is usually the attitude. So her dissonance resolved is maybe the school has a point. Maybe they do need that money. So how does cognitive dissonance theory play a part in pledging for a fraternity? Right. So how does it play a part in all this? Well, cognitive dissonance would say, well, these guys are guys that say that they're going to be my brothers and they're going to respect me and they're going to treat me as an equal. But in order to get to that point, I need to be humiliated and hazed, right? So there's a cognitive dissonance there. All right. So we've got two more short slideshows. Let's look at social influence real quick. So social influence, conformity, adjusting one's behavior or thinking to coincide with a group standard. People don't like to be outside of the group. It's a very vulnerable place to be. And so they are more often than not going to conform. All right, the ash line study. So the ash line study went like this. They showed you three options. They said, this is the line that we want you to pick out of this. Which one is it? And so obviously, if there was just one subject, they would almost always say two because it's the right answer. But what they did in the ash line study is they put in 5 actors and 1 actual subject. And the 5 actors would all lie. They would start off getting them right, but then after a couple of lines, they would start getting them wrong. And they would all pick the same wrong answer. And what they were trying to do is see how long it would take for somebody to pull them off of the right answer onto the wrong answer. So what would usually happen is after about three times of fighting with the group and saying a different answer than the rest of the group, usually people will conform and fall into line and just say what everybody else in the group says, regardless of if it's correct or not. All right. So what strengthens conformity? If you feel incompetent, if you feel like you're not the smartest person in the room, you're much more likely to conform. The group against you is at least 3 people. 2 against 1, people have a tendency to dig in, but if it's 3 against 1, they have a tendency to conform. The group is unanimously against you. One admires the group status. So if you have a bunch of doctors and lawyers or celebrities, right, you're much more likely to go along with them than you were if they were people in a lower status group. That they had not made a prior commitment. Now, if they asked the subject first in the Ashline experiment, they would often say the right answer and then stick to it. But if they put them in the middle or at the end, they hadn't made the commitment yet, they would start going with the group. And the person that's conforming has to be observed by the group. So if they're voting in secret, then they're obviously not going to conform. But if they are observing the group and the group is observing them, they're much more likely to conform. All right, so why do we conform? Normative social influence. This is one of the first words of the day we ever had. Influence resulting from a person's desire to gain approval or avoid disappointment. So when we look at this, we got normative or normal social influence. So we look around us, and what we see around us is what we view as normal. It's usually not. It's usually not normal, but we view it as normal. And so whenever we look around us, we say, okay, everybody around us has a smartphone, so it's normal to have a smartphone, right? So kids in high school should have smartphones. That's not actually statistically true of the world at large, but around our school, it is. Informational social influence. So um, this is your willingness to accept others' opinions about reality. So remember, the mind is limited. It's going to take any shortcut it can. So it's going to look at the information that comes in, say, do I believe that person? And then go with their opinion if you respect them. All right, so the cousin to conformity is obedience. We talked about this experiment 2 or 3 times throughout the school year, Milgram's shock experiment. So what they were doing is they were seeing if they could get people to press these levers that were supposedly, they weren't really, but they were supposedly giving shocks to people in the other room. And the only reason that they were doing this is that the scientist that was behind them was telling them to do it. So people would go up to this danger level almost all the time. Several people, about more than half in one experiment, kept hitting this XXX danger lever whenever they ran out of levers because they wanted to see how long that they would go. All right. So here's a graph of one of the Milgram's obedience studies. Whenever this study came out, it was so shocking that they just kept doing it over and over again. So there are a lot of Milgram studies, all of them slightly different, but here's one of them. So percentage of subjects who obeyed the experimenter, who said, go ahead and shock the person, right? So at slight, everybody did it. At moderate, only a few people had dropped out. Your biggest drop goes between moderate and strong, but then it kind of levels out, and people will up to 66% in this particular case will go all the way to the end and then keep hitting the lever. So ordinary people can do shocking things. A little bit of a pun there, right? All right. So how do groups influence behavior? Social facilitation. So social facilitation is if you know how to do a task well and you are competent in it, and then you have a group of people cheering for you while you're doing it, you're much more likely to do well than if you are new to the subject or haven't mastered it yet. So social facilitation is that you can improve your performance because there are other people there and watching you and cheering you on. All right, so we talked about this back in the motivation chapter. So Yerkes Dodson law says that the quality of the performance and the level of arousal have an inverse curve here. So if it's too hard, you're not going to be motivated to do it. If it is too easy, you're not going to be motivated to do it. Only here is the social facilitation going to kick in. All right, social loafing. So whenever you have a group of people, they tend to exert less effort when pooling their effort than if they were to be individual. So if you had one person in a factory that could move 50 boxes a day, but you needed to move 100 boxes a day, you would actually need to hire two more people. Um, because of social loafing, um, each person that you add is going to increase your productivity a little bit less to a certain point. All right. De-individuation, the loss of self-awareness and self-restraint in group situations that foster arousal and anonymity. So we talked about this, those of you who looked at the um, last year's essay, either on Saturday or whenever we did it on Wednesday. But de-individuation is whenever you get caught up into what the group's doing. The group is all doing one thing, and you just kind of go along with it. This is how riots start. Um, this is how the KKK operates, right? So it's exciting, and you're not likely to be the one arrested or caught, and so you're much more likely to do something negative. All right. Group polarization. So, whenever you're in a group, the people in the group have a tendency to go towards the extremes of the group. They don't necessarily go to the middle ground. So, if you're in a group, you're much more likely to be extreme. If they were to take you out of that group, they were to take any one person out and ask them questions, they would probably be much more moderate than they are when they're with the group. All right, so we have here a high prejudice group and a low prejudice group. So what they did is they started with the score here, uh, 0 being no prejudice. Um, so these are people that lean more towards, they have more of a bias towards what they were looking at, and these are people that have less of a bias or a biased against what they were looking at. We're not sure what they're prejudging here. But what they did is they then put them in groups of like-minded people. And what you're going to see is that the high prejudice group, whenever they're put together, become more prejudice. The low prejudice group becomes even less after discussion. All right. And groupthink is a mode of thinking that occurs when basically you want to be part of the group and somebody in the group has a really bad idea. But the group says, yeah, let's do that. And you're like, okay, well, um, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I don't want to say, no, I don't want to be part of the group, or I want to be on the outside of the group, so you're going to go along with it. So this happened a long time ago, so it's not so relevant anymore, but there was a hazing incident at Northbrook High School where basically a bunch of seniors took the incoming new recruits and um, they went through a process of tarring and feathering them. This is very dangerous. It usually leaves people with third-degree burns and infections. People that were tarred and feathered back in the Puritan days usually died of an infection. So this was not something that was funny. Somebody probably heard it in a history class and said, "Oh, that's funny." It's not funny. It's very dangerous. But nobody in the group says, "Hey, this sounds dangerous," to pour boiling oil on somebody. So there you go, groupthink. All right. So we can also influence ourselves. This is tougher. The power of the individual can be stronger than the power of the group, but it's usually going to cost you something. It may cost you friends in the group. It may cost you social capital, so that you're not as respected in the group. To say, "Hey guys, this isn't the right way to go." All right. And self-fulfilling prophecies. Um, this kind of has to do with the way that we treat each other. It occurs when one person's belief about somebody else leads them in a way to confirm that belief. So if you think somebody's going to find you more attractive, they most likely will. If you think somebody's going to be aggressive or mean to you, right, they probably will. And a lot of that is the way that you come at them. If you think somebody's going to be mean to you and you start off defensive and snippy, then they're much more likely to be mean to you, which becomes what we call here a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right, last one, guys. Last one of the year. Kudos to anybody who's sticking with me through all this. I think this is it. Yep. All right. So the social cognitive perspective. So we're still talking about social psychology, but we're bringing in the cognitive to it, right? So social cognitive theory. How do we interact with our environment? So one of the terms here is reciprocal determinism. Um, This is the interacting of influences between personality and environmental factors. So your personality can affect the way that you act on the environment, which can, in return, affect the way that the environment acts on you. So different people choose different environments, right? The TV that you look at, the friends that you hang out with, the music you listen to, these are chosen by you. Um, so as you guys are getting into the young adult phase, you have more and more choice over what you are exposed to. But whenever you expose yourself to that, you have a tendency to become that. So one of the things that, so after you choose the environment shapes you. One of the best things for me as a teacher was when Bad Girls Club went off the air, because way too many high schoolers were watching that and thinking, oh, that's how people behave and get what they want. And It just made for a bad time for everybody. All right. So our personalities help create the situations that we react to. So you do something that creates a situation, then you react to the situation, and then you say, "Oh, I didn't have any choice. I was put in that," right? You did have a choice, but it was made way before. If I expect somebody to be angry with me, I might give them a cold shoulder. I might yell at them, and then I create the behavior that I'm expecting. So there's two big ideas here that we need to get to on personal control. So whenever we look at how we are, uh, how us and the environment are interacting, um, is the environment controlling us or us controlling the environment? Once again, it's both, but it is up to us to think of what's in our control and what's out of our control. So we have these two terms here. These show up fairly often. We've got an external locus of control. An external locus of control is that there are forces outside of you that make decisions for you. So in some cases, this is true. Sometimes you get put in a situation where you don't have any other good way to go than the way that you're trying to go. But this would be an external locus of control. You're giving control to the environment because you're saying, oh, well, that's just fate. That's just the way things are. Um, things like that. An internal locus of control is that you control your own fate. So you think that um, what you're doing is going to change the situation. So internal locus control, you control your own destiny. All right, and last one we're going to talk about, this one was the word of the day about 4 weeks ago at this point. Learned helplessness. This is when an animal or human learns to basically that something bad's going to happen regardless of what they do. So whereas with behaviorism, if you're doing a negative behavior, something bad will happen. With learned helplessness, it doesn't matter what you do. If you do a negative behavior, something bad will happen. If you do a positive behavior, something bad will happen. So that is the idea behind learned helplessness. All right, guys. So thank you very much. You have made it through the course. You actually don't really need me anymore, but I will be obviously doing some review stuff with you guys, especially units 1 through 7, so you're ready for the test. But we are wrapped up for the year as far as the notes go. Thank you guys so much. It's been an honor. And I will hopefully see you guys soon. Bye.